I lost $380,000 on a Tuesday. That's what I told them anyway. It was October 17th, 2023. I remember the date because the receipt from the grocery store was still on the kitchen counter. $42.16 for eggs, black bread, canned soup, and a small piece of salmon I ended up not cooking. The kind of receipt you don't throw away right away, as if small numbers might somehow anchor the larger ones. The call to my son, Daniel, lasted exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Daniel, I said, sitting at my old oak table, the one my wife insisted we buy back in 1989. There's been a problem with the bank. Silence on the other end, then a sigh. Not concern. Calculation. What kind of problem? I think I've been scammed. Wire transfers. I don't fully understand it yet, but it's about $380,000. Another pause. Longer this time. That's a lot, Dad. Yes, I said. Yes, it is. He didn't ask if I was okay. Not right away. Instead, he asked, was it all in one account? I remember staring at the kettle on the stove. It started to whistle softly, a thin, nervous sound. I didn't move to turn it off. Yes. Jesus, he muttered. That's basically everything, right? Most of it. That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small, almost polite click, like a lock turning somewhere deep inside the conversation. Well, he said finally, clearing his throat, you should call the bank immediately and maybe report it. I'll see what I can do, okay? I'm a bit tied up today. Tied up? I repeated. Yeah, meetings. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, or at least I thought I did. We hung up. 3 minutes, 12 seconds. I checked the call log twice, as if the duration might change. It didn't. By evening, my daughter Melissa called. 6:47 p.m. I remember because I had just reheated the soup, microwaved it for exactly 2 minutes, stirred, then another 30 seconds. It still tasted like metal. Daniel told me, she began, her voice soft in that rehearsed way people use when they're performing sympathy. I'm sorry, sweetheart. How could this happen? She asked quickly, almost too quickly. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. Another pause, then carefully. Were there any safeguards? Insurance? Anything like that? No. I see. She exhaled. Not relief. Not quite disappointment either. Something in between. Well, she said, these things happen, I guess. Especially at your age. At your age. I looked around the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed steadily. A magnet held up an old photograph. My wife, Eleanor, standing in this very room, flower on her hands, smiling at something outside the frame. At my age, I repeated quietly. I didn't mean it like that, Dad. Just, these scams target older people. Of course they do. We talked a little longer. But the conversation had already ended. The rest was just words filling space. Over the next few days, the calls became shorter, then less frequent. By November, the silence had settled into the house like dust. It gathered on the bookshelves, on the armrests of my chair, on the unused second cup I still placed on the table out of habit. No one asked how I was managing. No one asked what I would do next. And that's when I began to understand something. Losing $380,000 hadn't ruined my life. It had simply revealed its true shape. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. The first thing to disappear wasn't the money. It was routine. For years, my phone had rung with a certain predictability. Sundays at 10:15, Daniel, always from his car, Bluetooth crackling, complaining about traffic and interest rates in the same breath. Wednesdays at 7:30, Melissa, usually while cooking, asking if I transferred the $2,000 for her mortgage just to stay ahead of things. After October 17th, those calls didn't stop immediately. That would have been too obvious. They thinned. Daniel called the following Sunday, but not at 10:15. It was closer to noon. Hey, Dad, he said, voice distracted. I could hear voices in the background. A cafe, maybe? Any updates with the bank? No, I said, stirring my tea, though I hadn't added sugar. They're investigating. Right. A pause. These things take time. Yes. Another pause. Longer. Well, he said, keep me posted. No mention of dinner. No mention of visiting. Before, he would sometimes say, maybe I'll swing by this week. He never committed. But the possibility was always there. like a chair pulled halfway out from the table. Now even that was gone. Melissa, for her part, became efficient. Her next call lasted 2 minutes and 4 seconds. "Dad, quick question," she said. "About November. I assume you won't be able to help with the mortgage this month." There it was. No hesitation. No softening. "I suppose not," I replied. "Okay," she said briskly. "I'll have to rearrange things then. It's just tight with the kids' school fees. $1,850 this quarter. Can you imagine?" "I can." "All right. Just checking. Talk soon." We didn't. By mid-November, the house had changed in ways that had nothing to do with money. I stopped buying fresh fish. It goes bad too quickly when you're eating alone. The coffee machine, a Jura E8 I'd paid $2,300 for back in 2021 because Daniel insisted good coffee is a lifestyle, Dad, began to feel excessive. I switched to instant. 2 teaspoons boiling water, no ceremony. Small economies. Pointless, really. Old habits pretending to be necessity. I kept a notebook on the kitchen counter. Not out of need, but out of discipline. Dates, expenses, observations. November 12th, no calls. November 15th, Melissa read message, no reply. November 18th, Daniel sent thumbs up, emoji. A man notices patterns when silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. The irony, of course, was arithmetic. I had paid $68,000 toward Daniel's business loan in March 2021. I remember the exact date, March 3rd, because the bank clerk asked if I was sure 3 times before processing the transfer. Family, I told her. Melissa's house, down payment, $120,000 to June 14th, 2019. I even paid the closing costs, another $8,750. She cried that day, called me her hero. Heroes, I've learned, are only useful during construction, not maintenance. There were smaller numbers too, endless, forgettable, but they added up like dust. $5,200 for Daniel's temporary cash flow issue in August 2022. $3,600 for Melissa's kitchen renovation. Just cabinets. Dad, nothing fancy. $1,200 here. $800 there. Birthdays. Emergencies. Opportunities. Love. Translated into wire transfers. On November 22nd, I called Daniel. It rang 5 times. "Hey," he answered finally. No warmth. Just acknowledgement. "I was thinking," I said, looking at the empty chair across from me. "Maybe you could come by this weekend. We haven't seen each other in a while." A pause. "This weekend's tough," he said. "We've got stuff." "Stuff. Yeah, life." I see. Another pause, then almost as an afterthought. "Maybe next week." "Maybe," I agreed. We both knew what that meant. That evening I made myself dinner. 2 eggs overcooked. Toast slightly burned on one side. I ate at the table, not in front of the television. Some habits I refused to surrender. Halfway through the meal, I realized something. It wasn't just that they had stepped back. It was how precisely they had measured the distance. Not enough to feel guilty. Just enough to stay comfortable. And that's when the numbers in my notebook began to look different. Not like losses, like evidence. The transfer took 11 minutes. I remember because I timed it, not out of anxiety that had passed weeks ago, but out of habit. When you spend 40 years managing systems, budgets, contingencies, you develop a certain respect for processes. Even the quiet ones, especially the quiet ones. It was October 16th, 2023. One day before I lost everything. 8:42 a.m. I logged into my primary account at First National. 8:44. Verification code sent to my phone. 8:45. Balance displayed. $382,417.63. I stared at that number longer than necessary. Not because of what it meant, but because of what it had cost. 43 years at the plant. Night shifts. Weekends. Overtime I didn't have the strength for, but took anyway. Eleanor used to say, "You don't need this much security, Henry. You need rest." She was wrong about that, but she was right about something else. One day, you'll find out who you really saved it for. At 8:47, I opened the secondary account. It wasn't new, just forgot. A small regional bank 2 towns over. I had opened it in 2009 after a colleague got caught in a messy divorce. "Always keep something separate," he told me over stale coffee and vending machine cookies. I deposited $5,000 back then, left it untouched, until now. The transfer itself was simple. External account, routing number, confirmation, amount, $380,000. Not everything. I'm not reckless. At 8:51, the system asked, "Are you sure you want to proceed?" I actually smiled. "Yes," I said out loud, though no one was there to hear it. "I'm sure." 8:53 processing, 8:56 pending, 8:58 completed. Just like that, the money had disappeared, on paper at least. The story I told him the next day about scams, about wires, about confusion, wasn't entirely fiction. It was just redirected truth. Money had moved. Trust had been tested. Only the intent was different. At first, I told myself it was precaution, a way to simplify things, to protect what remained, to create distance between my assets and potential complications. That's what I wrote in the notebook on October 18th. Reallocation of funds, risk management. It sounded respectable, rational, clean. But by October 25th, the language had changed. Observation period. By November 1st, test. I didn't expect miracles. I'm not naive. I know people have lives, obligations, limits. I wasn't looking for grand gestures or dramatic declarations of loyalty. Just consistency. A visit. A longer conversation. A question that wasn't financial. Something small. Something human. On November 5th, I tried an experiment. I called Melissa not to talk about money, but about Eleanor. "Do you remember her apple pie?" I asked. A pause. Then, "Dad, I'm actually in the middle of something. Can we talk later?" Of course. We didn't. On November 9th, I texted Daniel. "Found your old baseball glove in the garage. Still in good condition." He replied 6 hours later. "Nice thumbs up." That was all. I began to adjust variables. November 14th, I mentioned casually that I might need help with some paperwork. Daniel suggested a look into online services. November 18th, I said the house felt too quiet. Melissa recommended a streaming subscription, $14.99 a month. Companionship, apparently, now comes with a login and a password. By the third week, the pattern was undeniable. Their concern had not just decreased. It had recalibrated. Before October 17th, I was an asset with emotional packaging. After October 17th, I was just packaging. On November 27th, I made the final note. I remember the exact wording. I wrote it slowly, carefully, as if drafting something official. Test results, negative. I closed the notebook, sat there for a while, listening to the refrigerator hum, the faint ticking of the clock above the stove, the quiet, indifferent rhythm of a house that no longer expected visitors. Then I stood up, walked to the cabinet, and took out 2 cups. Out of habit, I placed them on the table, looked at them for a moment, and then for the first time in years, I put one back. I didn't raise my voice. At my age, you learn that volume is a poor substitute for precision. The meeting took place on December 12th at 2:00 p.m. in a conference room on the 3rd floor of Hargrove and Klein Legal Services. Neutral territory, beige walls, glass table, a coffee machine that hissed like it disapproved of everything being said in that room. I arrived 15 minutes early. Old habit. I wore my gray suit, the one Eleanor liked. The fabric had thinned at the elbows, but it still held its shape. Unlike certain relationships. At 1:58, Daniel walked in first. Navy coat, phone in hand, eyes already scanning for exits. Melissa followed 2 minutes later, heels clicking sharply against the tile, carrying a leather folder she didn't open. They both looked concerned. Not about me, about the situation. "Dad," Melissa said, sitting down, offering a quick, practiced smile. "You sounded serious on the phone." "I am," I replied. Daniel didn't sit immediately. He hovered near the chair, then finally pulled it out with a short scrape. "You said something about documents?" he asked. "I did." On the table in front of me lay 3 folders, neatly aligned, labeled transfers, statements, summary. I slid the first one toward them. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to clarify something." They exchanged a glance. Quick, nervous. "The $380,000, I continued, was never stolen." Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. It was almost impressive how quickly their expressions changed, not to relief, as one might expect, but to something sharper. Wait, Daniel said slowly. What do you mean not stolen? I said, folding my hands, that on October 16th, at 8:58 a.m., I transferred $380,000 myself, from my primary account to a secondary account under my sole control. Melissa blinked. That's not funny, Dad. I'm not trying to be funny. I opened the transfers folder and turned it toward them. Printed confirmations, dates, times, routing numbers, transaction IDs, everything clean, documented, undeniable. Daniel leaned forward, scanning the pages. You lied to us, he said. There it was. Not why. Not are you okay? Just accusation. Yes, I said. I did. Melissa's voice sharpened. Do you have any idea what kind of stress you put us through? I looked at her. Do I? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Daniel tapped the paper with his finger. So what, this was some kind of experiment? Yes. He laughed once. Short, humorless. That's insane. Is it? I let the silence sit. It's important sometimes to give people space to reveal themselves. They rarely disappoint. For 6 weeks, I continued. I observed something interesting. I slid the second folder forward. Statements, phone records, message logs, dates of contact, duration of calls. Melissa frowned. You were tracking us? I was measuring change. Daniel pushed the folder slightly away, as if it might stain him. This is ridiculous, Dad. People have lives. You can't expect. I expected nothing. I interrupted quietly. That was the point. I opened the third folder. Summary, numbers, clean, precise. March 3rd, 2021, $68,000. Your business loan, Daniel. He stiffened. June 14th, 2019, $120,000. Down payment, Melissa, plus $8,750 closing costs. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Various transfers between 2019 and 2023. Approximately $47,300 combined. I looked up. Total. $243,050. No one spoke. Even the coffee machine had gone quiet. I'm not bringing this up for repayment, I said. I consider that money spent. Daniel exhaled, tension loosening just slightly. Wrong assumption. What I am addressing, I continued, is valuation. Valuation? Melissa repeated. Yes, specifically mine. I leaned back slightly in my chair. When the money disappeared, so did I. That landed, not dramatically, but it landed. Daniel rubbed his temple. Okay, what do you want from us? Finally, a useful question. Nothing, I said, and I meant it. I closed the folders one by one, deliberately. The purpose of this meeting, I added, was not to repair anything. Melissa's voice dropped. Then what was it for? I stood up. To make sure we all understand the same thing. I looked at both of them, not with anger, but with something far more final. Now we do. No one tried to stop me as I walked out, and that, more than anything else, confirmed I had been right. They called the next day, not together. That would have required coordination. Daniel was first 9:12 a.m. I was making oatmeal. Real oatmeal this time, not the instant kind. Rolled oats, 5 minutes on low heat. A pinch of salt. Eleanor's way. The phone vibrated against the counter, rattling slightly against the ceramic sugar jar. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, he said, skipping any greeting. We need to talk. We already did. No, we didn't. Not really. A pause, then carefully. You blindsided us. I stirred the pot slowly. Did I? Yes, he said, sharper now. You lied about losing that kind of money. Do you understand how serious that is? I do. You made us think you were vulnerable. There it was again. Not worried. Not afraid for you. Vulnerable. As opposed to what? I asked. Another pause. That's not the point. It seems to be. Melissa called at 11:47. Her approach was different. Softer tone. Slower words. Strategy. Dad, I've been thinking about yesterday, she began. And I think maybe we all overreacted. All of us. Yes, she said quickly. The situation was emotional. Miscommunication happens. Does it? I just feel like we shouldn't let this damage the family. The word family hung there, polished and convenient. I sat down at the table, looking at the empty chair across from me. What exactly are we preserving? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Relationships, she said finally. Defined how? Dad, she exhaled softly. This doesn't have to be adversarial. By afternoon, the tone had shifted again, subtly, efficiently. At 2:15 p.m., Daniel sent a message. We should also discuss future planning. Given everything, it might be smart to structure your assets properly. Avoid confusion later. At 2:22 p.m., Melissa followed. Maybe trust? It would protect you too. We can help manage things so nothing like this happens again. There it was. Not anger, not distance. Correction, repositioning. Like investors adjusting after a market fluctuation. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took out the fourth folder, the one I hadn't shown them. It was prepared on December 5th. Hargrove and Klein. 6 pages. Clean. Final. Last will and testament. Alongside it, a second document. Establishment of the Eleanor Grant Foundation. Named after my wife. She would have laughed at that. Or rolled her eyes. Don't turn me into a plaque, Henry, she used to say. Too late. At 3:00 p.m., I called my lawyer. Everything is ready? I asked. Yes, Mr. Klein replied. Once you sign, it's effective immediately. The transfers will be executed within 5 business days. Good. And your children? They've already received what I intended to give them. A pause on the line. I understand. That evening, I signed the documents. 6:18 p.m. Same pen Eleanor had bought me years ago. Black ink. Slightly uneven flow. My hand didn't shake. The numbers were simple. $380,000. Allocated to the foundation. Purpose. Educational grants. Trade schools. Scholarships. Practical things. No monuments. The house to be sold upon my passing. Proceeds added to the same fund. Daniel and Melissa? Nothing further. Not as punishment. As conclusion. At 7:42 p.m., I finally replied to their messages. Not with explanations. Not with arguments. Just a single line sent to both. Arrangements have been made. Daniel called again at 8:03. I didn't answer. Melissa sent 3 messages between 8:10 and 8:26. I read them. Didn't respond. The house was quiet that night. Not empty. Just settled. Like a room after furniture has been removed. The shape remains, but the weight is gone. I made tea. Sat at the table. 1 cup this time. Across from me. The chair stayed exactly where it was. Unused. Unnecessary. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. And when it did, later that night I let it. Winter came quietly that year. No dramatic storms, no heavy snowfall. Just a slow, steady drop in temperature that crept into the walls, the floors, the joints in my hands. The kind of cold you don't notice at first, until one morning you realize you've started wearing socks to bed. I adjusted, set the thermostat to 68 instead of 72, switched to thicker blankets, bought a small electric heater for the kitchen. $49.99, nothing extravagant. It hummed softly in the mornings while I made tea. Life, reduced to its essentials, has a certain clarity. The call stopped entirely by December 20th. Not abruptly, gradually, like everything else. Melissa's last message was at 9:14 p.m. on the 18th. Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this. Daniel's came the next morning. We should talk like adults. I considered replying. Then I remembered the meeting, the folders, the numbers. We already had. On December 24th, I cooked a proper dinner. Not out of nostalgia, out of discipline. Roasted chicken, potatoes with rosemary, a small salad I didn't finish. I set the table for 1. No extra plate this time. I had broken that habit. The television played something in the background. Holiday music, soft and forgettable. At 7:30 p.m., I sat down to eat. At 7:42, the phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I answered, not out of hope, out of curiosity. Dad, he said. His voice was different, tighter, controlled. Merry Christmas Eve, I replied. A pause. Yeah, you too. I cut into the chicken. It was slightly overcooked. We need to talk about what you did, he continued. We've covered that. No, he said. You made a decision that affects all of us. I set the fork down. No, I corrected. I made a decision about what belongs to me. Another pause. You're being stubborn. And you're being consistent. That's not fair. I almost smiled. It's precise. Melissa joined the call a minute later. Three-way connection. Efficient. Coordinated. Dad, she said, this isn't just about money. No, I agreed. It never was. Then why are you punishing us? There it was again. Punishment. As if absence of reward automatically implied intent. I'm not punishing you, I said calmly. I'm reallocating. That's the same thing. No, I replied. Punishment requires anger. And you're not angry? Daniel asked. I looked at the empty chair across from me, thought about the weeks of silence, the measured distance, the quiet recalculation. No, I said. I'm finished. Silence. Not the soft kind. The kind that lands heavy and stays there. You're making a mistake, Melissa said finally. I already did, I answered. Years ago. No one asked what I meant. They didn't need to. We ended the call without resolution. No raised voices. No dramatic exits. Just a clean mutual understanding that there was nothing left to negotiate. That night, I washed the dishes immediately after dinner. Another small discipline. No leftovers in the sink. No delays. The house was quiet again, but it felt different. Not empty. Defined. In January, I received a letter from the Foundation's legal office. First set of scholarships approved. 3 recipients. A mechanic's apprentice in Ohio. A nursing student in Arizona. A young woman studying electrical engineering. That one made me pause. Total disbursement. $18,000. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it neatly in the drawer. The phone sits on the same spot on the counter. It still rings occasionally. Unknown numbers. Telemarketers. Wrong calls. Sometimes I let it ring. Sometimes I answer. The difference matters less than it used to. People think loneliness is about absence. It isn't. It's about realization. I still wake up at 6:00 a.m. Old habits. I make tea. Sit by the window. Watch the light settle over the street. Slow and indifferent. Some mornings I think about calling them. Just to see. Just to confirm. Then I remember. I already did. The money didn't disappear. Neither did they. I just finally saw where everything really was. And for the first time in years, I adjusted the balance accordingly.